Hey there, you're looking kind of cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my other socials. Enjoy. Within the dimly lit laboratory, the buzz of machinery intensified as the clock struck 11. Months of tireless dedication and innumerable experiments had culminated in this pivotal instant. At the heart of the chaotic workspace, an extraordinary vial attracted attention. An iridescent purple liquid danced within, its luminescence mesmerizing to behold. Dr. Franklin's appearance reflected his dedication. His white lab coat was slightly rumpled, and his typically immaculate blonde hair fell haphazardly across his forehead. Despite the fatigue, Franklin's eyes shone with determination. He meticulously scanned the lab, assuring himself that every detail was in place. As he raised the vial under the faint glow of the safety lamps, he whispered, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Preliminary tests on cellular samples show promise for complete genetic restructuring. However, human trials remain theoretical. The sensible thing would be to wait, run more tests, find volunteers, follow proper protocols. But Franklin had already waited too long. The university had cut his funding 3 months ago, dismissing his research as too radical and ethically questionable. They didn't understand the potential, the ability to rewrite biology itself, to give people the bodies they were meant to have. His hand trembled slightly as he uncorked the vial. The scent that escaped was oddly floral, like jasmine mixed with ozone after a lightning strike. Beginning self-administration of Formula 7X at 11:47 p.m. Subject is male, age 32, weighing 170 pounds, wearing standard laboratory attire, white coat, blue jeans, black shoes. Franklin paused, the vial inches from his lips. Was this madness? Perhaps. But great discoveries required great risks. Marie Curie had exposed herself to radiation. Jonas Salk had tested his polio vaccine on his own family. This was his moment. The liquid was surprisingly warm as it flowed down his throat, coating his mouth with a tingling sensation that spread rapidly through his body. He set the empty vial on the counter and gripped the edge of the table. Initial observations: mild burning sensation in the throat and esophagus, elevated heart rate, slight dizziness. The words caught in his throat as a wave of heat crashed through him. His knees buckled, and he barely managed to lower himself to the floor before his legs gave out entirely. Every nerve ending seemed to fire at once, sending conflicting signals of pain and pleasure racing through his system. Subject experiencing severe physiological response. His voice cracked on the words. Body temperature rising, muscle spasms in. A sharp cramp doubled him over. His stomach churned and roiled as if something inside was rearranging itself. Through the white lab coat and blue jeans, he could see his midsection beginning to swell and shift. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not quite pain, but a deep, fundamental wrongness, as his body rebelled against its own structure. Sweat poured down his face as he struggled to document the changes. The scientist in him demanded observation, even as the human part wanted nothing more than to curl up and wait for it to pass. Abdominal distension noted, significant repositioning of internal organs suspected, lower body experiencing. He gasped as warmth flooded his pelvis. It felt as if molten honey was pooling in his lower abdomen, reshaping everything it touched. The emptiness that followed was even more disturbing. A hollow ache between his hips where something should be but no longer was. His hands shook as he fumbled with his belt. The blue jeans that had fit comfortably an hour ago now felt wrong, pressing in places that didn't make sense. Through the fabric, he could feel his hips beginning to widen, bones grinding and shifting with wet pops that made him gag. Pelvic restructuring in progress. Formation of... The clinical words failed him as another wave of transformation swept through his body. His chest burned as if acid was eating through his ribs. He tore at the buttons of his lab coat, desperate for air, and watched in fascination and horror as his torso began to change. The flat planes of his chest swelled outward, flesh gathering and reshaping into soft mounds that strained against his undershirt. Time lost all meaning. Minutes or hours could have passed as he lay on the cold laboratory floor, his body a battleground of competing biological imperatives. His bones ached as they shortened and thinned. Muscle mass redistributed itself, leaving him smaller but somehow more complete. Even his skin seemed to change, growing softer and more sensitive to every current of air. The worst part was the wetness. His body expelled fluids from every pore as it rebuilt itself, leaving him lying in a puddle of sweat and other substances he didn't want to identify. His clothes clung to him like a second skin, heavy with moisture and suddenly ill-fitting in every dimension. When the most intense waves finally subsided, Franklin found himself staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the water stains to keep from losing consciousness. His throat felt raw, though whether from the formula or from sounds he didn't remember making, he couldn't say. Transformation appears to be stabilizing. The voice that emerged from his lips was higher, softer, still recognizably his own, but filtered through a different instrument. Subject remains conscious. Significant morphological changes observed. With tremendous effort, he rolled onto his side and then pushed himself up to a sitting position. The simple movement felt alien. His center of gravity had shifted, and his limbs didn't quite respond the way muscle memory expected. The white lab coat hung loose on his smaller frame, and his jeans bunched oddly around his altered hips. Franklin reached for the voice recorder with a hand that seemed more delicate than before, fingers longer and more tapered. 6 hours and 14 minutes since initial administration. Subject has undergone complete biological restructuring consistent with female physiology. Hair color remains blonde, though texture appears softer. Facial structure exhibits significant feminization. Body mass reduced by approximately 20%, with redistribution to hips and chest regions. Standing proved to be another challenge. His legs felt wobbly, like a newborn colt's, and he had to grip the lab bench to keep from falling. In the black reflection of the powered-down computer monitor, he caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar face, heart-shaped, with larger eyes and fuller lips. Still recognizably connected to who he had been, but undeniably different. Motor functions temporarily impaired, likely due to skeletal and muscular changes. Subject will require time to adapt to new proportions and center of gravity. She paused at the pronoun confusion. The scientific part of her mind noted this as an expected psychological adjustment. The human part felt a strange mix of exhilaration and terror at the implications. The lab coat slipped off one shoulder as she moved, revealing the stretched and distorted undershirt beneath. Her jeans had split along the hips at some point during the transformation, held together now only by the belt. Every piece of clothing felt wrong, designed for a body that no longer existed. Note for future trials, subjects should be unclothed or wearing loose-fitting garments to accommodate physical changes. Current attire is insufficient. She stumbled toward the small bathroom attached to the lab, each step a lesson in relearning her own body. The fluorescent light flickered on, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating a stranger in the mirror. The face that stared back was undeniably feminine. Her blonde hair, previously short and professional, had grown several inches during the transformation and now hung in sweat-dampened waves around her face. High cheekbones and a delicate jaw replaced the angular features she had known for 32 years. Even her eyes seemed different, the same color but larger, framed by longer lashes. Subject exhibits complete facial feminization, bone structure consistent with female genetics, no apparent complications or malformations. Her hands explored the changes with clinical detachment, cataloging each difference. The Adam's apple that had bobbed in her throat was gone, leaving a smooth column of pale skin. Her shoulders had narrowed while her hips had widened, creating an hourglass silhouette even through the baggy clothes. The scientist in her was fascinated. The formula had worked beyond her wildest expectations, rewriting her genetic code at the most fundamental level. This wasn't mere cosmetic change. Every cell in her body had been transformed. But the human in her trembled with the magnitude of what she had done. There was no going back. The formula was designed for permanent change, to give people the bodies they needed to match their inner selves. She had tested it on herself not out of a desire to change, but out of scientific necessity. Now she would live with the consequences. Psychological impact remains to be determined. Subject experiences mild disorientation and identity confusion, but remains cognitively intact. Further observation required. She turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face, watching the sweat and grime swirl down the drain. Her reflection wavered in the ripples, a ghost of who she had been overlapping with who she had become. The exhaustion hit her all at once. The transformation had consumed enormous amounts of energy, leaving her depleted and shaking. She needed food, water, and rest, probably in that order. But first, she needed to document everything while the experience was fresh. Returning to the lab, she found her digital camera and began taking photographs from every angle. The scientist in her demanded complete documentation, even as she felt exposed and vulnerable in her ill-fitting clothes. Each image would be invaluable data for understanding the full extent of the changes. Visual documentation completed. Subject shows no signs of rejection or adverse reaction beyond expected discomfort. Formula 7X appears successful in its intended purpose. She paused, considering the implications. The formula could help countless people struggling with gender dysphoria, giving them the bodies they were meant to have. But in the wrong hands, it could be a weapon or a tool of oppression. The ethical considerations made her head spin. A knock at the laboratory door made her freeze. The digital clock on the wall showed 6:23 a.m. Who would be here this early? Dr. Morrison, I saw your car in the parking lot. Is everything all right? The voice belonged to Marcus, the security guard who did morning rounds. She had exchanged pleasantries with him hundreds of times over the years. But now? Everything's fine, Marcus. Just finishing up an experiment. Her higher voice cracked slightly on the words. There was a pause from the other side of the door. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this is a restricted area. Only Dr. Morrison has access to this lab. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was Dr. Morrison, but how could she explain that? How could she prove her identity when she barely recognized herself? I'm Dr. Morrison's research assistant. He asked me to monitor the experiment overnight. Another pause, longer this time. I don't have any record of a research assistant. I'm going to need you to open the door, ma'am. Panic fluttered in her chest. She couldn't let anyone see her like this, not until she understood the full extent of the changes. The formula was her life's work, but it wasn't ready for the world. Too many questions, too many variables still unknown. Give me just a moment. I need to secure the samples. She grabbed her laptop and began hastily backing up all her research data to an encrypted drive. The formula composition, the trial results, her voice recordings, everything had to be preserved. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with desperate efficiency. Ma'am, I need you to open this door now or I'll have to call campus police. Almost done! The backup completed just as she heard the jingle of keys. Marcus had a master key, of course. In seconds, he would open the door and see her. A strange woman in Dr. Franklin Morrison's private lab, wearing his clothes, claiming to be his assistant. She did the only thing she could think of. Grabbing her car keys and the encrypted drive, she headed for the emergency exit at the back of the lab. The alarm would sound, but it was better than trying to explain the impossible. The door burst open just as she reached the exit. Stop right there! But she was already through, the alarm shrieking behind her as she stumbled into the early morning light. Her car waited in the nearly empty parking lot, a familiar sanctuary in a suddenly unfamiliar world. The drive home was surreal. Every bump in the road reminded her of how different her body felt. The driver's seat was too far back, the mirrors angled wrong. She had to adjust everything just to see properly, her shorter stature changing even these mundane details. Her apartment building loomed before her, 3 stories of faded brick that had been home for 5 years. But as she climbed the stairs, she realized another problem. Her keys worked, but what would the neighbors think? They knew Dr. Franklin Morrison, the quiet scientist who kept odd hours. They didn't know this woman in his clothes, fumbling with his keys. Franklin? That you? Mrs. Chen from 2B peered out her door, hair in curlers and housecoat wrapped tight. Her eyes narrowed in confusion at the unfamiliar woman. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I thought I heard Franklin's door. He asked me to check on his apartment, water his plants while he's away." The lie came easier this time, though guilt twisted in her stomach. Mrs. Chen had always been kind, bringing over extra dumplings and checking in when she didn't see him for days. Away? He didn't mention anything about a trip? That's not like him at all. It was sudden. A research opportunity. You know how devoted he is to his work. Mrs. Chen's expression softened with understanding. Everyone in the building knew about Franklin's obsession with his research, the long hours and missed meals. It was the perfect cover story. Well, make sure those plants get plenty of water. The jade plant especially. Franklin loves that thing. Brought it all the way from his mother's house when she passed. The reminder of her mother sent an unexpected wave of emotion through her. How would she explain this to the few family members she still had contact with? How could she make them understand? "I'll take good care of everything." Inside the apartment, she locked the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The familiar space felt foreign, decorated for someone who no longer existed. Scientific journals stacked on every surface. A half-eaten sandwich from yesterday moldering on the kitchen counter. Men's clothes filling the closet and dresser. First things first, she needed a shower. The dried sweat and other fluids from the transformation made her skin itch, and her clothes were beyond salvaging. She peeled off the ruined garments, noting how each piece of evidence would need to be carefully disposed of. The shower was a revelation. Hot water had never felt so different, cascading over skin that seemed to have twice as many nerve endings. She cataloged each change methodically, the way her blonde hair now reached past her shoulders, the curves and valleys that hadn't existed 12 hours ago, the absence of familiar landmarks and the presence of new ones. Clean and wrapped in a towel that suddenly seemed enormous, she faced the practical problem of clothing. Nothing in the apartment would fit properly. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of men's clothing in sizes that would hang off her new frame like tents. She ended up improvising with a t-shirt that fell to mid-thigh and a pair of sweatpants cinched tight with a drawstring. The effect was less professional scientist and more college student after an all-nighter, but it would have to do until she could go shopping. Shopping. The mundane necessity of it almost made her laugh. She had successfully transformed her entire biological structure, rewritten her genetic code, achieved something science had deemed impossible. And now she needed to buy underwear that fit. The encrypted drive sat on her kitchen table, innocuous and world-changing. All her research was there, waiting to be refined and shared with the world. But first, she needed to disappear. Dr. Franklin Morrison was now a missing person, and the woman in his apartment had no legal identity. She opened her laptop and began making plans. New identification would be necessary, though she had contacts from her less legitimate research funding who could help with that. A new name, something close enough to feel familiar, but different enough to avoid suspicion. Francine, perhaps? Dr. Francine Morrison had a nice ring to it. The university would report her missing eventually. Marcus had certainly already filed an incident report about the strange woman in the lab. Security footage would show her entering, but not Franklin, raising questions she couldn't answer. The police would investigate, find no signs of foul play, and eventually declare Dr. Franklin Morrison a missing person. It was a necessary sacrifice. The work was more important than one person's identity. The formula could change lives, save lives, give people the freedom to become who they truly were. She just had to survive long enough to perfect it and find a way to share it safely with the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from her research partner, Dr. Elizabeth Warren. "Where are you? Marcus said there was an incident at your lab. Security is crawling all over the building." She stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Elizabeth had been more than a research partner. She was the closest thing to a friend Franklin had allowed himself. They had spent countless late nights discussing theoretical applications and ethical implications. Elizabeth would understand the science, might even understand the necessity. But could she trust her with this? "I'm fine. Had to leave suddenly. Will explain when I can." "Franklin, what's going on?" This isn't like you." The concern in the message was palpable. Elizabeth knew Franklin too well. Any deviation from his predictable patterns would raise alarms. "Trust me, please, give me a few days to sort things out." She turned off the phone before Elizabeth could respond. Every digital connection was a potential trail leading back to her. She would need to be more careful. The next few hours were spent in preparation. She packed a bag with the few items of clothing that sort of fit, her research materials, and what cash she had on hand. The jade plant Mrs. Chen had mentioned sat on the windowsill, leaves drooping slightly from neglect. On impulse, she watered it and ran her fingers over the smooth leaves. Her mother had grown it from a cutting, a tiny piece of life that had survived and thrived through careful tending, like her formula, like her new self. A sharp knock at the door made her freeze. It was too early for Mrs. Chen to be checking in again, and Elizabeth didn't know where she lived. "Dr. Morrison, this is campus security. We need to speak with you about an incident at your laboratory." Her heart hammered against her ribs. They had tracked her down faster than expected. The emergency exit had security cameras. Of course, they would have seen her car, run the plates, found her address. "Dr. Morrison, we know you're in there. Your car's in the parking lot. We just want to make sure you're safe." She recognized the voice. Tom Bradley, head of campus security. She had shared coffee with him at faculty meetings, discussed the weather and football scores. He was a good man, just doing his job, but she couldn't let him in. Couldn't explain why a woman was in Franklin's apartment, wearing Franklin's clothes, claiming to be Franklin. The truth was too impossible, too dangerous. The window in the bedroom led to the fire escape. It was a 3-story drop to the alley below, but there was a dumpster that might break her fall if necessary. She grabbed her bag and the encrypted drive, leaving everything else behind. "We're coming in, Dr. Morrison." The sound of a key in the lock spurred her into motion. She slipped out the window just as the front door opened, pressing herself against the brick wall as voices filled her apartment. "Clear in the living room." "Kitchen's empty. Check the bedroom." She held her breath, praying they wouldn't think to look out the window immediately. The morning air was cool against her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. 3 stories had never seemed so high. Bathroom's clear, wet towel, still warm. He was here recently. Windows open in the bedroom! Now or never. She scrambled down the fire escape as quickly as her unfamiliar body would allow, the metal stairs clanging under her bare feet. She had forgotten shoes in her haste, a rookie mistake that would make her even more conspicuous. There, someone on the fire escape. She didn't look back, just ran. The alley led to a side street that connected to the main thoroughfare. If she could make it to the subway station 2 blocks away, she might be able to disappear into the morning commuter crowd. Her new body moved differently, hips swaying in ways that threw off her gait. She had to consciously adjust her stride, fighting against muscle memory that no longer applied. The sweatpants threatened to slip down her narrower hips with each step. "Stop! Campus security!" But she was already turning the corner, bare feet slapping against cold concrete. A few early morning joggers gave her strange looks, a disheveled blonde woman in ill-fitting clothes, running barefoot through the streets. But this was the city. They had seen stranger things. The subway entrance yawned before her, a gateway to anonymity. She fumbled for her transit card, hands shaking as footsteps pounded behind her. The turnstile clicked open just as Tom Bradley rounded the corner, red-faced and breathing hard. Their eyes met for a brief moment. His face showed confusion and something else, a flicker of recognition. But then she was through, taking the stairs down 2 at a time as a train pulled into the station. She squeezed through the closing doors just as Bradley reached the platform. Through the window, she saw him speaking rapidly into his radio, probably calling in her description. But the train was already moving, carrying her away from her old life and into an uncertain future. The other passengers studiously avoided looking at her, just another city crazy, barefoot and wild-eyed on the morning commute. She found a seat in the corner and tried to make herself small, acutely aware of every difference in how her body occupied space. Where would she go? She had no plan beyond escape. Her bank accounts were tied to Franklin's identity, as were her credit cards and professional connections. She had some cash, but not enough to last long. The encrypted drive burned in her pocket, containing research that could change the world but might also destroy her life. As the train rattled through dark tunnels, she made a decision. Dr. Elizabeth Warren lived on the other side of the city, in a brownstone she had inherited from her grandmother. Elizabeth was brilliant, compassionate, and most importantly, had always believed in the potential of Franklin's research. If anyone would understand, it would be her. But first, she needed shoes. She got off at the next station and found a 24-hour drugstore. The teenage clerk barely looked up from his phone as she grabbed cheap flip-flops, a baseball cap, and sunglasses. Not much of a disguise, but better than nothing. The morning sun was fully up by the time she reached Elizabeth's neighborhood. Tree-lined streets and well-maintained brownstones spoke of old money and stability, everything her life currently lacked. She had only been here once before, for a dinner party Elizabeth had thrown for the research team. That seemed like a lifetime ago. Standing on the doorstep, she hesitated. Once she revealed herself to Elizabeth, there would be no taking it back. Either she would have an ally, or she would be reported to the authorities as a delusional stranger claiming to be a missing scientist. The door opened before she could knock. Elizabeth stood there in a silk robe, coffee mug in hand, looking exactly as put together as she always did, despite the early hour. Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to concern in rapid succession. "Can I help you?" The words stuck in her throat. How did you tell someone that you were their missing colleague, transformed by your own experiment? How did you prove an impossible truth? "Elizabeth, it's me. It's Franklin." The coffee mug slipped from Elizabeth's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Brown liquid spread across the polished wood, but neither of them moved to clean it. "That's not... You can't be..." "The Formula 7X trials. I tested it on myself last night. Complete genetic restructuring at the cellular level, just like we theorized." The scientific terminology came easier than emotional explanation. "I know how this sounds, but I can prove it. Ask me something only Franklin would know." Elizabeth's face had gone pale, but her scientific mind was clearly working behind shocked eyes. "The conference in Geneva. What did we discuss over dinner the second night?" "The ethical implications of permanent biological transformation. You argued that informed consent would be impossible because no one could truly understand what they were consenting to until they experienced it. I said that was paternalistic thinking, that people had the right to make their own choices about their bodies. We went through 2 bottles of wine and nearly missed our morning sessions." The detail was too specific, too accurate to be anything but truth. Elizabeth sagged against the doorframe. "My God, you actually did it! You absolute madman, you actually did it!" "Madwoman, technically." The attempt at humor fell flat. "Elizabeth, I need help. Security is looking for me, for Franklin. I can't go back to my old life, but the research is too important to abandon. I have all the data here." She pulled out the encrypted drive. "Everything we worked for, everything we dreamed of achieving. It works, Elizabeth. It actually works." Elizabeth stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Get in here before someone sees you. We have a lot to discuss." The interior of the brownstone was warm and elegant, all dark wood and inherited antiques. Elizabeth led her to the kitchen, movements automatic as she grabbed another mug and poured coffee from a fresh pot. Neither of them acknowledged the broken mug in the foyer. "Start from the beginning, every detail." So she did. The decision to test the formula, the transformation itself, the escape from security. Elizabeth listened without interruption, her expressions cycling through disbelief, fascination, and worry. "The physiological changes are remarkable," Elizabeth finally said, studying her with a clinical eye. "Complete facial restructuring, body proportion redistribution, even your hair grew. The formula exceeded every projection." "The hair was unexpected. I hypothesized some cosmetic changes, but the follicles themselves seem to have been reprogrammed for accelerated growth. It's stabilized now, but during the transformation..." "Franklin?" Elizabeth's use of the old name was jarring. Francine, whatever you want to be called, this is extraordinary, but we need to think practically. You're a missing person. Security has your description. You have no legal identity in this form. I know, I've been thinking about that. I have some contacts who might be able to help with documentation, but I need somewhere safe to stay while I figure things out. The formula needs more work too. The transformation was successful, but incredibly taxing. If we're going to make this available to others, we need to refine the process, make it less traumatic. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. You'll stay here. The basement has a fully equipped laboratory. Grandmother was a biochemist, believed in working from home. We can continue the research while we figure out how to handle the administrative complications. Relief flooded through her. Elizabeth, I can't ask you to... You're not asking? I'm offering. This discovery could help thousands of people live authentic lives. That's worth a little risk. She paused, studying her former colleague with curious eyes. How are you handling this psychologically? The dysphoria must be significant. It was a question she had been avoiding. The scientist in her could catalog the physical changes objectively, but the emotional reality was more complex. It's strange. I didn't transition because I felt trapped in the wrong body. I did it for science, to prove the formula worked. But now that I'm here, in this form, I don't feel wrong. Different, yes. Disoriented, definitely, but not wrong. The brain is remarkably adaptable, and if your formula works as designed, it's not just changing your body, it's rewriting your neurology to match. Your brain chemistry is now female, producing female hormones, interpreting sensory input through female neural pathways. In theory, yes, we'll need extensive testing to confirm. She rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. God, Elizabeth, what have I done? I've thrown away my entire life for an experiment. You've made a breakthrough that will be remembered for generations. The personal cost... Elizabeth reached across the table and took her hand. The touch was warm, comforting. We'll figure it out, together. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of research and adjustment. Elizabeth's basement laboratory was indeed well equipped, though updating some of the older equipment took creative procurement. They refined the formula, analyzing the data from Francine's transformation to identify areas for improvement. The physical adaptation was easier than expected. Her new body felt increasingly natural as neural pathways rewired themselves. She learned to walk in heels, necessary for the times she had to venture out for supplies, to style her lengthened blonde hair, to dress in clothes that fit and flattered her changed proportions. Elizabeth proved invaluable, not just as a research partner, but as a guide to navigating the world in a female body. She taught Francine things that those raised female learned through years of socialization: how to be aware of her surroundings in a different way, how to handle unwanted attention, how to claim space in a world that often tried to make women small. The forged documents arrived after 3 weeks, courtesy of a contact from Franklin's more questionable funding sources. Dr. Francine Morrison officially existed, complete with a manufactured history that would withstand casual scrutiny. It felt like identity theft, except she was stealing from herself. The research progressed rapidly. They identified the compounds that had caused the most traumatic aspects of the transformation and developed buffers to ease the process. What had taken Francine 6 agonizing hours could now be accomplished in 2, with significantly less discomfort. But they needed test subjects, and that meant going public in some form. We could publish under pseudonyms, Elizabeth suggested one evening as they reviewed their latest findings. Release the initial data to gauge response before revealing the full scope. Francine shook her head, blonde hair falling across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, a gesture that had become automatic over the past month. The scientific community would demand verification, peer review. We'd have to demonstrate the formula's effectiveness, and that means revealing what happened to me. Then we go to the trans community directly. Find volunteers who understand the risks and rewards. Build case studies that can't be ignored. It was a good plan, but it meant exposure. Francine had grown comfortable in the cocoon of Elizabeth's brownstone, venturing out only when necessary and always carefully disguised. The thought of standing before strangers, explaining what she had done and why, made her stomach clench. But the work was bigger than her comfort. They started small, reaching out through carefully worded posts on specialized forums. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of people desperate for the chance to transform, to finally match their external selves to their internal truth. Screening was essential. They needed subjects who were psychologically prepared for permanent change, who understood that this wasn't magic but science with all its limitations and risks. Elizabeth took the lead on interviews while Francine prepared the laboratory. Their first volunteer was a woman named Diana, who had been assigned male at birth 43 years ago. She had transitioned socially and hormonally, but couldn't afford surgery. The hope in her eyes when she arrived at the brownstone nearly broke Francine's heart. "You understand this is experimental?" Elizabeth explained for the 5th time as Diana signed consent forms. "The transformation is permanent and irreversible. There may be complications we haven't anticipated." "I've been waiting my whole life to be myself," Diana replied. "Whatever the risks, they're worth it." Francine prepared the refined formula, hands steady despite her nerves. The purple liquid seemed less volatile than her original batch, more stable. Diana drank it without hesitation. The transformation took 93 minutes. Diana experienced discomfort, but nothing approaching the agony Francine had endured. They monitored every vital sign, documented every change. When it was complete, Diana stood before the mirror with tears streaming down her face. "It's me. It's really me." 5 more successful trials followed over the next month. Each refinement to the formula made the process smoother. Word spread quietly through the community. There was a way, expensive and experimental but real, to completely transform. But secrecy couldn't last forever. The knock came at 3 in the morning, sharp and authoritative. Francine jolted awake in the guest bedroom that had become hers, immediately alert. Elizabeth appeared in her doorway moments later, face grim. "They found us." Through the window, Francine could see unmarked vans and officers in tactical gear, not regular police, something federal. Someone had talked, or their careful digital trail hadn't been careful enough. "The research," Francine said, "already encrypted and uploaded to secure servers. If they arrest us, others can continue the work." It was small comfort facing the inevitability of exposure. Francine dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, both in shades of blue that had become her preferred colors. If she was going to be arrested, she would face it as herself. The brownstone's elegant door splintered under the battering ram. Officers flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Francine and Elizabeth were on the ground, hands zip-tied behind their backs, before they could speak. "Dr. Elizabeth Warren, you're under arrest for violation of federal regulations regarding human experimentation, practicing medicine without proper licensing, and conspiracy to commit fraud." They hauled Elizabeth to her feet. Another officer approached Francine, consulting a tablet. "Dr. Francine Morrison?" He frowned at the screen. "No, that can't be right. The documents must be forged. Who are you really?" She met his eyes steadily. "I'm exactly who those documents say I am."
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.